2:30 a.m., May 14th, 2008. A teenage boy is alone in complete darkness, surrounded by miles of rural farmland. His phone is pressed to his ear. On the other end, his father is driving, listening intently. Brandon Swanson is calm, at first. He says he can see lights in the distance, maybe a town. He thinks he hears running water. He keeps walking, describing fences, open fields. Still, no one can find him. Then, without warning, a shout. "Oh, shit!" The call goes silent. No crash, no splash, no scream. Brandon's phone remains powered on, ringing and ringing, but never answered again. To this day, Brandon Swanson has never been found. This is the case of the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Chapter 1. A Bright Future. Brandon Swanson was born on January 30th, 1989, in the quiet town of Marshall, nestled in Lyon County, southwestern Minnesota. He grew up alongside his sister in this rural farming region, home to roughly 25,000 residents. The landscape was flat and open, a patchwork of corn and soybean fields, with small towns like Marshall, Canby, and Lind spaced miles apart, connected by highways and gravel roads. From a young age, Brandon stood out. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, recognized early on that their son possessed a sharp intellect. He excelled in reading comprehension well ahead of his peers and developed a lasting passion for learning, particularly in science and technology. That natural curiosity followed him through Marshall High School, where he graduated in 2007. After high school, Brandon enrolled at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, about 30 miles northwest of Marshall. There, he entered a science program focused on wind turbine technology, a field poised for growth in the region. By all accounts, Brandon was thriving. His instructors later described him as intelligent, motivated, and well-liked by both faculty and fellow students. At the time, Brandon still lived with his parents in Marshall, making the daily commute back and forth to Canby. But his ambitions were larger than rural Minnesota. As his first year came to a close, Brandon made plans to transfer to Iowa Western Community College in Council Bluffs, over 250 miles away. It was a bold move, one that reflected his desire to expand his horizons, meet new people, and find more opportunity beyond the small towns he'd always known. But Brandon would never make it to Iowa. Chapter 2. The Last Night. It was May 13th, 2008. Brandon Swanson, now 19 years old, had just completed the final day of his spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. It marked the end of his freshman year, and he had every reason to celebrate. That evening, he made plans with friends to attend a couple of low-key get-togethers in the area. The first was in Lind, a quiet town about 8 miles southwest of Marshall. The gathering was modest, just a few people in the backyard. Witnesses later said Brandon spent most of the evening talking with a group of 5 or 6 friends. He was seen drinking, but none of those present recalled him appearing intoxicated or impaired. He seemed upbeat and in good spirits, talking about his upcoming transfer to Council Bluffs. Later that night, Brandon decided to visit a second party in Canby, roughly 30 miles northwest of Marshall, where another friend was celebrating the end of the school year. That friend, like Brandon, had plans to leave Lyon County in pursuit of greater opportunities. Brandon arrived at the party sometime around 11 p.m., stayed briefly, and had another drink or two. Again, there were no reports of erratic behavior or signs of intoxication. At approximately midnight, Brandon left Canby to drive home to Marshall, but instead of returning via Highway 68, the main well-lit route he had used earlier that evening, Brandon took a series of rural backroads, gravel, isolated, pitch black. Why he made that decision is unclear. Some believe Brandon may have wanted to avoid law enforcement due to the drinks he had consumed, even if he didn't appear intoxicated. Others suggest he simply thought the back roads would be faster or more direct. What's important is that this detour took him far off the expected route and into a maze of unmarked farm roads. It's unknown how familiar Brandon was with these back roads. He had no GPS, and being legally blind in his left eye, his depth perception and night vision were likely limited. The region he was navigating is a geometric grid of similar-looking fields, intersected by ditches, crop lines, and the occasional abandoned road. At that hour, the fields were barren, the planting season still weeks away, and the sky moonless, meaning Brandon was driving through one of the darkest places in the state, with only his headlights to guide him. Had he stayed on Highway 68, Brandon would have likely arrived home before 12:30 a.m. Instead, he vanished into the shadows of rural Lyon County. What happened over the next 90 minutes remains one of Minnesota's most baffling mysteries. Chapter 3: A Call in the Dark. At exactly 1:54 a.m. on May 14, 2008, Brandon Swanson called his parents from his cell phone. His voice was composed but urgent. He told them his car had veered into a ditch and he was unable to get it out. He believed he was somewhere between Marshall and Lind, just a few miles from home. Brandon asked his parents to come get him. He stayed on the phone as they got into their vehicle and began searching the area he described, driving the stretch of road between Lind and Marshall. Brandon said he could see their headlights. He even flashed his own headlights repeatedly, hoping they could spot him. But something was off. Brian and Annette Swanson saw nothing. No blinking headlights, no car, no Brandon. Unbeknownst to all three of them, Brandon was nowhere near Lind. Later cell tower data, specifically from the tower near Taunton, Minnesota, placed him approximately 20 to 25 miles northwest of where he believed he was. He had likely taken a wrong turn after leaving Canby and driven into a rural, unlit part of Lincoln County, near the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. At 2:17 a.m., after more than 20 minutes of fruitless searching and confusion, Brandon hung up the phone in frustration. Moments later, he called back. He now said he was walking toward the lights he saw in the distance, again, still convinced they were the town of Lind. Brian agreed to meet him at the Lindwood Tavern, and after dropping Annette at home, drove to the spot. What followed was one of the most haunting phone calls in any missing person case. For the next 47 minutes, Brian stayed on the phone with his son as Brandon walked alone in total darkness. He described passing fences and hearing the sound of rushing water nearby, likely the Yellow Medicine River or one of its feeder creeks. He continued moving toward the distant lights. Brandon even speculated aloud that he was walking near a golf course, a detail that aligned with Lind's layout. But in reality, he was describing open farmland. Because the spring planting season hadn't started, the fields would have been flat and empty, easily mistaken in darkness for something more structured. Then, just after 3:10 a.m., Brandon's voice abruptly shifted. Oh, shit. That was the last thing Brandon Swanson ever heard from his son. The line went dead, not disconnected, but silent. Brian called back immediately. The phone rang. It went to voicemail. He called again. Still no answer. He hoped Brandon had simply dropped the phone and would see it light up, but Brandon never picked up again. That moment, those two final words, marked the end of all contact. To this day, no one knows what Brandon saw or what happened in that final instant. Chapter 4. Into the Night. In the hours that followed Brandon Swanson's final phone call, confusion gave way to urgency. After Brandon exclaimed, "Oh shit," and the line went silent at around 3:10 a.m., his father Brian tried calling back immediately. The phone rang, then went to voicemail. He redialed multiple times. Each attempt was the same. The ringtone, then silence. The phone hadn't been powered off. It simply wasn't being answered. Brian, still parked in front of the Lindwood Tavern, continued to call out Brandon's name, hoping he'd drop the phone and would hear the ringtone. But there was no response. By 6:30 a.m., nearly 3 hours after that final outburst, Brian and Annette Swanson made the decision to contact law enforcement. What happened next has drawn criticism ever since. Despite the circumstances, a 19-year-old man stranded in the middle of the night, possibly injured or disoriented, last heard walking near a river. The first responding officers initially dismissed the urgency of the situation. They reminded the Swansons that Brandon was an adult and had the right to be missing. The implication: give it time. He'll turn up. Frustrated, the Swansons bypassed the frontline responders and contacted the Lyon County Sheriff's Office directly. That move made the difference. A full-scale search was launched that same day. Investigators used cell tower data to locate Brandon's last known position. His phone had pinged off a tower near Taunton, Minnesota, placing him 17 miles northwest of Marshall and approximately 20 miles from Lind, a dramatic departure from where he thought he was. At 12:30 p.m. on May 14th, authorities found Brandon's Chevy Lumina. It was located just off 390th Street, between Taunton and Porter, about 1 mile north of Highway 68. The vehicle was in a ditch, resting at a steep enough angle that the wheels had lifted off the ground. Attempts to drive it out, both forward and in reverse, had likely been futile. There were no signs of damage, no footprints, no indication of the direction Brandon had gone after leaving the car. The area around the ditch was bare, just dirt, gravel roads, and open farmland. From there, investigators began piecing together what little they had. Brandon had believed he was near Lind, and he had mentioned seeing lights and hearing running water. In reality, his surroundings were rural, isolated, and deceptively disorienting in the dark. The Yellow Medicine River ran nearby. If Brandon had been walking through fields and gravel roads in that direction, it aligned with the sounds and sensations he described to his father: water, fences, and open terrain. Search teams brought in tracking dogs, hoping they could identify a scent trail. Most of the dogs failed to pick up anything, except one. Chapter 5. The Trail That Disappeared. With Brandon Swanson's car recovered by 12:30 p.m., on May 14th, but no trace of him nearby. Search efforts intensified. The focus shifted to the fields and roads surrounding 390th Street, a remote corridor between Taunton and Porter, where Brandon's vehicle had been found. Investigators turned to search dogs, hoping scent tracking could shed light on his movements after leaving the car. Several dogs were brought in over the course of May 14th and 15th, but most failed to detect any trail. Only one bloodhound, working off Brandon's worn clothing, picked up a scent. What followed was one of the few leads investigators would ever get. The dog began tracking the scent by heading south from the car's location, following a gravel road for roughly half a mile. Then the trail turned west, continuing for about a mile down 390th Street. From there, it shifted north briefly, then turned west again, leading into what appeared to be an abandoned farm driveway. This is where the trail grew stranger. The dog continued through the abandoned property and began following the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. At one point, the dog even leapt into the river, then climbed out and continued tracking. Eventually, the scent path ended abruptly, near a drainage or wooded area not far from the Lincoln-Yellow Medicine County line. This added another layer of mystery. If Brandon had fallen into the river and drowned, it would be unusual for the dog to reacquire his scent on the far side, suggesting he had made it out of the water alive sometime between 3:15 and 4 a.m., based on estimated walking pace and route. But if he had survived crossing the river, where did he go next? And why had no further evidence, no footprints, no clothing, no personal items been found? Over the following days, particularly between May 14th and June 15th, 2008, the Yellow Medicine River became a central focus. It was searched extensively by ground teams, boats, divers, and sonar. No trace of Brandon, not his phone, his clothes, or his body, was ever recovered. Despite being combed for over a 30-day period, the river offered no answers. The area around the abandoned farm was also thoroughly searched during that same time frame. Investigators theorized Brandon might have sought shelter or wandered into a hidden depression or sinkhole. Again, no results. It was as if the trail had simply vanished. The dog's track to the river and beyond remains one of the most compelling and confounding aspects of the case. It suggests Brandon was on foot, coherent, and actively moving for a considerable time after leaving his vehicle. But it also contradicts the theory that he succumbed immediately to the elements or drowned near the car. Instead, it raises an unsettling question. How far did Brandon get? And why did he seem to disappear without a trace? Chapter 6. The Scent at Mud Creek. Approximately 3 weeks after Brandon Swanson's disappearance, another possible lead emerged, this time involving a second body of water, Mud Creek. Located 3 to 4 miles north of both Porter and Taunton, Mud Creek is a narrow, winding tributary that eventually feeds into the Yellow Medicine River. It's a quiet, often overlooked stretch of shallow water surrounded by brush and farmland, and it became a point of interest after search dogs picked up another trace. According to Jeff Hassa, a search coordinator with Midwest Technical Rescue Training, dogs working the area began showing strong scent reactions near the Mud Creek watershed. Hassa would later state, "We've got huge amounts of scent in there, more than I've ever seen in any other search. So we are really confident that he's somewhere in the watershed. We just can't get to that final point." But that raised questions and more confusion. If the trail from the car had led south and west, ending near the Yellow Medicine River, How could a second strong scent now be coming from a location several miles north? There are a few possibilities. Some theorize Brandon may have made it to the river, crossed it, and then, in a disoriented or hypothermic state, doubled back, eventually ending up near Mud Creek. Others suggest that the initial trail may not have told the full story, and that perhaps both trails were valid, indicating multiple routes Brandon had taken. Adding to the complexity was the reluctance of local landowners. Several farmers in the region refused to allow K-9 teams and search personnel onto their properties unless they were presented with a formal search warrant. Many cited concerns about liability, damage to crops, or spooking livestock. These delays hampered the ability of scent teams to follow leads in real time, and may have cost valuable hours or even days during the critical early phase of the search. Yet another possibility is that the scent near Mud Creek was a residual scent, carried by water or wind, or a false positive caused by another environmental factor. The K-9 handlers, however, maintained their confidence in the dogs' reactions. Importantly, it was never clarified whether the dogs detecting scent near Mud Creek were live scent dogs, tracking Brandon's trail, or cadaver dogs, trained to detect decomposition. That distinction matters. If the scent was biological decay, and if cadaver dogs were involved, it would imply that Brandon may have perished somewhere in or near Mud Creek. But without physical evidence, no clothing, no phone, no remains, the theory remains just that. And it only complicates an already tangled case. Mud Creek was searched. Just like the Yellow Medicine River, it turned up nothing. No one can say for certain if Brandon ever made it there. But for search teams on the ground, the strength of the scent in that area suggested they were close, maybe even within yards. Yet they could never bridge the final gap. To this day, Mud Creek remains one of the last places where Brandon's scent was ever detected. Chapter 7: The Theories and Unanswered Questions. As the days turned into weeks and spring crept toward summer, the search of the Yellow Medicine River expanded. For more than 30 consecutive days, dive teams, law enforcement, and trained K-9 units combed the waters, the banks, and the surrounding land. Not a single article of clothing, shoe, phone, or item belonging to Brandon was found. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Search teams walked farmland for miles. The river itself was swept repeatedly, both near the ditch and downstream. The search was thorough, but it turned up nothing. That's when questions turned into theories. Theory number 1: accidental drowning in the Yellow Medicine River. This was the earliest and most widely held assumption. Brandon may have tried to cross the river in total darkness, misjudged the bank, and fell in. It had rained recently, and the current was higher and faster than usual. Combined with his limited vision, legally blind in one eye, this made him especially vulnerable. But there are problems with this theory. Most notably, a trained scent dog tracked Brandon's scent down the road, across the river, and then kept going. If Brandon had drowned there, why did the scent trail continue? Theory number 2: he got out of the river. But then what? If the dog's trail is accurate, it suggests Brandon may have fallen in and then gotten out. But if he escaped the water, why didn't he call again? Why wasn't he found later? Searchers considered that he might have succumbed to hypothermia after escaping the water. Temperatures that night hovered between 39 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 to 8 degrees Celsius. Brandon had been wearing only jeans, a t-shirt, a zip-up hoodie, and a pullover. If wet, his body could have entered hypothermic shock quickly. Hypothermia can cause confusion and a behavior known as terminal burrowing, where individuals try to crawl into small enclosed spaces. It's possible Brandon wandered into a culvert, drain, or crevice. But again, the dogs should have picked up his scent if he were nearby. Theory number 3, a fall into a well, a sinkhole, or something worse. The farmland surrounding the area includes old wells, drainage ditches, and natural sinkholes, some of which may not be visible in tall grass. Could Brandon have fallen into one after escaping the river? This would explain the absence of remains. But these sites were searched, at least the visible ones. It's possible he reached an area that search teams never accessed. Theory number 4, foul play. While law enforcement has never uncovered evidence of foul play, some speculate Brandon may have been picked up after leaving the ditch, either willingly or unwillingly. It's been suggested that someone pretending to help may have harmed him. A hit-and-run driver panicked and concealed his body. A landowner or stranger confronted him, and things escalated. There is no direct evidence to support these ideas, but the complete absence of clues has left space for darker theories. The "oh shit" moment. Then there's the most haunting moment of the case, Brandon's final phone call. At exactly 2:30 a.m., while speaking with his father, Brandon shouted, "Oh shit!" and the line went silent. There was no crash sound, no scream, no splash, just silence. Brandon Swanson kept calling out his son's name. The phone stayed connected for several more minutes. Then it was hung up. Afterward, it continued to ring before going to voicemail. If Brandon had dropped it in water or lost battery, it wouldn't have rung. If he'd fallen into the river, wouldn't there have been a sound? This moment is the centerpiece of confusion in the case. Something happened, something that startled Brandon. But what? The lights he saw. During the earlier part of the call, Brandon told his father he could see lights in the distance. He thought it was Lind, but it couldn't have been. He was 25 miles northwest of that town. So what did he see? Could it have been Taunton or Porter? Or a distant farmhouse? Was it a car on Highway 68? Or something entirely else? He began walking toward the lights. If they were moving, like a car, he may have unknowingly walked away from them. Why nothing was found? This remains the biggest question. How can a person vanish completely within minutes of speaking on the phone? Despite searches covering over 120 square miles, involving 40-plus trained dogs and hundreds of volunteers, no trace of Brandon has ever been recovered. Not his body, not his clothes, not his phone. As Sheriff Dunn said, "We found nothing." And that's the hardest part. There's just nothing. Chapter 8. Brandon's Law and the Legislative Aftermath. In the weeks and months following Brandon Swanson's disappearance, the Swanson family faced not only unimaginable grief, but also frustration with the initial response from law enforcement. When Brian and Annette called 911 in the early morning hours of May 14, 2008, they were told they had to wait 24 hours to file a missing person report. Brandon was 19, legally an adult, and the assumption was that he may have left voluntarily. But this wasn't a runaway. Brandon had been on the phone with his father when something went terribly wrong. His tone, his urgency, the final "oh shit" before silence. It was clear to his family that something serious had happened. And yet, Their pleas were initially brushed aside. Annette Swanson refused to let that failure stand. In the aftermath of their son's disappearance, the Swansons met with Minnesota State Representative Marty Seifert, who helped introduce legislation that would change how missing adult cases were handled in the state. That legislation became known as Brandon's Law. Signed into law in May 2009, exactly 1 year after Brandon disappeared, Brandon's Law, Minnesota Statute 299C.565, mandates that law enforcement must take immediate action when a person is reported missing, regardless of age, if the individual's safety is believed to be at risk. Under this law, agencies can no longer delay investigations simply because the missing person is legally an adult. If foul play is suspected, or if the person has a mental or physical disability, is believed to be in danger, or is missing under suspicious circumstances, the law requires immediate intervention and coordination with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA. The impact was real and lasting. Brandon's Law has been credited with closing critical gaps in the state's missing persons policies and has inspired similar conversations in other states. It became a tool not just for Brandon, but for the many families across Minnesota who might one day find themselves in the same unimaginable situation. But for the Swanson family, the pain of not knowing remains. Over the years, volunteers have returned to the fields and riverbanks. New teams have come forward with technology and scent-tracking dogs. Each search brings hope and disappointment. No clothing, no phone, no trace of Brandon has ever been found. In a rural corner of western Minnesota, 120 square miles hold a silence that has lasted more than a decade. Brandon Swanson vanished on a spring night in 2008. A ditch, a phone call, a final shout, and then nothing. No one saw where he went. But thanks to the determination of his family, his name now carries the weight of something larger than the tragedy that took him. It carries change, accountability, and a law that ensures no parent in Minnesota will ever again be told to wait.